That we get started. It's actually incredibly impressive that the die-hard group is still here, 6:30, fourth day into the conference, and still ready to go and excited about the theme. That implies to me this is the hardcore of real enthusiasts that will deal with our issue and will keep momentum over the next 15 years. So no expectations. I've got some logistics first. I'm told that it's absolutely imperative that I tell everyone that the lost and found pile is growing. So if you're in need of key fobs, coats, notebooks, glasses, we've got a huge range of them. Yeah? I've suggested that these should perhaps be auctioned off as our fundraising exercise, but apparently that's not allowed under university rules. But seriously, if anyone's lost anything, it's the reception desk for the check-in, and you will find things there. They may be yours. You could choose someone else's. We won't know the difference. Secondly, there's a few people who have signed up for a campus tour on the UNC campus. That begins at the Student Union and takes you around major campus landmarks, and you can learn about the history of North Carolina's first university. We say that with great pride. The meeting for that starts at 1 p.m. Friday in front of Redbuds, and there's transport provided. And in a moment of extreme cheekiness, one of our sponsors, IAPMO, the Institution of Public and Mechanical Officials, has asked me to announce that in next September, they've got a fantastic conference in Cape Town they'd like you all to go to, please. So if you're into plumbing, Cape Town next year is obviously the place to be. We have now a plenary session that builds, a panel session that builds off the discussion that we began yesterday afternoon. The idea for this event was really born from a series of discussions, listening to the way the narrative associated with the SDGs is emerging. It's only over the last month, but there is a vocabulary, there's a set of words that we hear a lot. Many of us were in a session a little earlier. Lewis Borstin was talking about systems very extensively. We have a lot of talk about governance. The term enabling environment comes strongly. And then, of course, when we say, what is the enabling environment? I'm not quite sure. And the word sustainability, that first S of the Sustainable Development Goals, all relate to the fact that we've now got a lot of wash out there. We've got a lot of infrastructure. We've got a lot of embedded behaviors. We've got a lot to lose, and we've got a lot that needs to be maintained. At the same time that we still have to achieve those levels for everyone. All of those things point to the importance of institutions, different institutional types. What are their roles? What role do they play in achieving the SDGs and then sustaining the progress that we make? How do they relate to one another? So the notion of this panel was to bring together institutions. I'm going to use the word representative, but they can't speak for their entire institution time, but some sentinels, some indicators of different kinds of institutions that will be critical as we work towards and then beyond 2030. So let me briefly introduce our panel this evening. Paul Weisenfeld here is Executive Vice President of RTI's International Development Group. Now, it seems to me self-evident that RTI has been in a process of constant adaptation as the development agenda has evolved over quite a long period now. And I think it would be very interesting to learn more of how that adaptation is seen going forwards. What are the challenges that we need to respond to, or that RTI will be responding to, as we look towards the SDG period? I'm going to read these on the order they're here, so it's not left to right. That's an initiative test. And anyway, thank you. Tessie Saint-Martin, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Plan International. Plan International USA, that's correct, isn't it?
Correct.
Otherwise, I'll get in trouble,
yes,
and I don't want to do that. We've we've had a great partnership between UNC and Plan. And I remember last time we met a year ago here at the conference, a conversation where we were reflecting on how the NGO community has, in a relatively short period of time, moved from a mentality that was about project-driven infrastructure to much more systematic support, and how that was going to evolve yet further in the coming period. We have Heather Skilling, who's the Senior Water Sanitation Specialist at USAID. And that's right, isn't it? You're looking confused. You've not forgotten. Is that not good? I was very worried for a moment there. But critical bilateral relations, the relations between governments, the support that wealthier nations have provided to less wealthy nations, was a defining feature of the MDG period. As we move into the SDG period, SDGs are for everyone. Everyone has something to do. And yet there is no doubt in anyone's mind that international support is an important part of the way we will deliver on the SDGs. Kefa Ombacho, yeah, is Chief Public Health Officer, Ministry of Public Health and Sanitation for the Republic of Kenya.
Minister of Health.
Ministry of Health. What did I say? Ministry of Public Health and Sanitation. I apologize. It's Ministry of Health. Kefa, you have probably the heaviest burden on your shoulders because here you represent the implementing governments of the world. No pressure, right? But these are the institutions where a lot of pressures collide, expectations are high, and capacities just may be finite. Can we say that? So I think the perspective of how government institutions will evolve will be very important. Peggy Bentley is a close and valued colleague here at UNC. She's the Distinguished Professor of Global Nutrition at the University of North Carolina here, but has played, for a long time, has played a major role as
Associate
Dean for Global Health. Peggy is the person here that can talk for global health and global issues. And clearly we have enormous capacity shortfalls worldwide, and human resource capacities are things that universities contribute a great deal to. What is the role of a university in overcoming that skill gap, that capacity gap at a global scale? How do we relate to one another? And finally, there's someone called Jamie Bartram. He's a professor and director of the Water Institute at UNC. That's me. I'm your moderator. What we'd like to do this evening is cycle through perhaps 3 questions. And I'm not sure who'd like to lead off on this, but the first reflection we wanted to seek from the panel was to look back to the MDG period. What are the big lessons about the roles of institutions, how institutions relate to one another, that will be important as we now start to move ahead? I have in mind that there have been those moments of crushing humility when it's, oh no, we've been doing it wrong for so long. And aha moments when the light goes on and we have a realization that we really have a way forward, a way to make a difference. So moments of enlightenment during the MDG period. Who could I turn to come in first? Tessie, don't laugh. There were no moments of enlightenment.
Yeah, I can start if you want, but I don't really have moments of enlightenment. But just some thoughts, since that's what you asked us to do. Well, I mean, I guess 3 things that I would reflect upon. One is that it can't just be about doing. It has to be about learning. I think that's what we are learning as an institution. And that might seem super obvious to everybody here. It's not necessarily obvious to a real grassroots organization like Plan, right? Because we're all about doing. We see, I mean, we're about children's rights. We see a problem. Of course, we're going to go in there and we're going to solve it. And of course, when you're seeing huge needs, there's a desire, and I think a moral imperative to immediately jump in. But I think we have learned, and in part, I have to say, and I'll mention it a few times because I mean, part of the reason why I'm here so often every year is because this partnership with UNC has been really instrumental for showing Plan how to do that learning bit, which is really important. So it's not about stopping what you're doing, but it's making sure that you're putting in place systems, processes, procedures that allow you to be learning and that allow you to be constantly testing conventional wisdom. For us, on this whole CLTS thing, it was a big deal because CLTS is kind of, like communities, it's child-centered community development. Those are two things that are articles of faith in Plan. We do it a certain way because that's the way that we've always done it, and we think generally it works. And just a short anecdote, when I first came to Plan, and before I get back to CLTS, we had, you hear all this talk about communities, child-centered community development is our approach to community development. And I asked the question, it's like, so how do we know, why are we so excited about this? How do we know that this works? And they said, well, we seem to be getting like really good results. And in fact, we had been evaluating it over time, but what we had never done was taken a look at what all of those evaluations were summing up to do. And in fact, one of the things that we did do shortly after I got to Plan is in this case, we asked another university partner, Syracuse, we opened up all our evaluations of CCCD projects that we had done externally, and we said, do a meta-analysis. Tell us what this is telling you about why this works, where it works, and what have we learned. And I would say that we're doing the same thing, and we've done the same thing under this Gates grant with CLTS. We've taken, we've done rigorous, robust evaluation, real evaluations, to take a look at different ways of approaching CLTS and really start to learn. And it's been, I think, as Darren was telling me, it's been a challenge to even get our folks, say, in Ethiopia and Kenya, to understand that, no, I mean, when we do randomized controlled trials, it means that, one group is different than the other. You can't do the same thing in both, even though maybe you want to. I mean, so it's been a tough learning process, but it's about putting a learning agenda in the organization. That's number one, and I'll be much quicker on the other two. The other one, sort of the other big aha, if we're doing CLTS, is, so CLTS is about demand side. And we've been like a little Energizer bunny, very focused on that. Demand, demand, demand. We want to get people to demand toilets. We want them to get them to stop defecating outside. But, we've comprehended, to Jamie's point, there's a broader system here. The supply side matters. The enabling environment matters. And as Louis said in an earlier session today, it's not about saying that we're going to do everything, but it's about realizing that as you're doing the demand side, you have to be cognizant of these other elements of the system. You have to understand how they fit. We can talk about that more later. I think sort of the last, I don't know if enlightenment, but aha, and again, especially for an organization like Plan, where we haven't been doing a lot of emergency response work until much more recently. But we've tended to look at emergency response and what we do in stable, non-fragile environments as two very different things. In fact, they're not, and they have to be linked. And actually, we saw this in our emergency Ebola work. I mean, where we had been doing in times of stability very good, sanitation work in these countries, it really made a difference in terms of creating more resilience and helping to mitigate some of the risks that we saw during the Ebola outbreak. I mean, there are more lessons, but I'll stop there.
So the big things were learning and embedding learning from emergencies or spanning this apparent separation between emergency and stable status. And the second one?
Well, the second one was that, it's not about demand only or supply. I mean, it's a systems approach,
yep.
as it were.
And you quoted Lewis, and there was a great phrase in what he was describing to us earlier. And can you help me remember it? I think it was, as an institution, if you don't understand how where you are contributing to the system, you're not doing your job.
You're not doing your job. And I think we've learned that, sometimes the hard way.
Yeah. So there was a painful moment.
Yes. I try not to look at it that way. I want to give a different opinion from the donor perspective, since I'm not speaking on behalf of AID. Because Dominic's presentation, his keynote, inspired me, and you'll notice I have just these handwritten scribbles, and that I have an excuse because I spent all my time going back and researching aid effectiveness and looking back at the commitments that we've made, which was horrifying in many ways because it made me think that we actually have not learned anything, right? So Rome 2002, development aid should be based on country priorities. Paris 2005, use local systems. Accra 2008, harmonize and partner within the sector. Busan 2011, aid needs to be catalytic and we need more effective institutions. So a little bit of angst there. And that made me think a little bit about the progress in the MDGs and what was left undone, which brings us to sanitation, sustainability, equity. It becomes sort of clear when you look at it that way that we were cherry picking. We were picking low-hanging fruit, which was directly linked with the targets that we were setting for ourselves. So we were all aspiring to achieve targets, which was good. I mean, it kept us focused on something, but it gave us an excuse to miss out on so many other things. And looking forward to the SDGs, I'm starting to wonder, well, I think we've all been wondering, that level of aspiration and ambition, is that just creating another opening for us to figure out how to weave around the tough parts? So that brings us back to the whole conversation we've been having this week about systems and the collaboration and the behaviors that we heard about from Sanitation and Water for All, which are in essence a distillation of the whole aid effectiveness agenda, coming back to the 2002. So I think the question in front of us is then, what have we actually learned? I think we know these lessons. We've obviously been documenting them since 2002. So what is it that we actually need to be doing differently now in order to move forward in a different way?
And you have answers to that?
And I don't have answers to that. I mean, some of it I think is really about streamlining. I think it's really about that focus. I mean, I like that quote from Lewis, this idea of if you don't know what your exact niche is within those systems, and how do we specialize more and not try and do everything all together, I think there's a lot of power in that, in doing less and doing it better.
Because he spoke about contribution, not attribution, which yeah. I think many people in the room nodded when he said that.
Right.
We're so keen to say, well, we did that bit, rather than to say, well, actually, together we did that bit, but our contribution was this. Mm-hmm. And again, I thought that was really powerful. Gaffer, can you come in on this one?
Okay, it's my turn?
It could be. We could jump over you to someone else
okay.
if you prefer.
It's okay. I think, as you have rightfully indicated, different governments have got that primary obligation and objective to provide services to their people, the population. I think the starting point is that countries showed the commitment in actually trying to sign in and agreeing that they are actually going to be part of the process in their own countries. Now, that commitment, other than the normal ceremony of signing, I think it meant more. It meant that countries had to evaluate themselves and know that they have got the capacity. And when I talk about capacity, it's a holistic or inclusive capacity of the partners who are working plus within the countries. So countries were then supposed to go back and provide the critical object of giving leadership, bringing all those within the sector to sit together and work together, plan together, with an objective of having a one-country plan, which is very clear with objectives addressing what the gaps are within the countries. Now, that would have been done, but it wouldn't have worked without providing the essential enabling working tools, like trying to give it a legal framework, the policy, the strategy, the unpacking of the policy, so that you are very clear. That would have given some kind of confidence to the other players that, yes, in case of any problem, they have got a 4 point. They can actually just hold on the policy. So policy was supposed to be developed within the countries. After developing the policies, then those are within the policies, the issues of engaging with others who are coming in with resources. Doesn't necessarily mean money. It will be resources in terms of human resources, in terms of providing ideas. And of course, money will be part of that resource. Now, together, those are the private sector, NGOs, CBOs, were expected to work within, actually, with a clear clear idea of trying to actualize their plans. Now, the beauty of planning together, by the way, we have talked for quite a number of years about sector-wide approach, where we were supposed to pull together resources. And pulling resources doesn't necessarily mean that you just remove your money and put it elsewhere, but can you be able to declare what amount of contribution? But some of the things, and I think as one colleague have said here, that in a presentation of Luis, which I admired, and I think that gives us quite a big reason for us to be reminded, is the selfish interest that we tend to perpetuate. And that makes us actually lose the way. If the issue is to build systems within countries where you work, then I think the critical thing that you need to do is to strengthen the systems in that country and be part and parcel of the player in that country. But far from it, I think we are perpetuating the idea of I am be able to do this. And actually we lose giving the bigger picture within the country as a contributing factor to the global outcomes. And I think this is where we need to do things differently. Maybe a question I would ask, how many of you would be willing to do things differently? I bet there will be maybe half or a quarter.
Should we do a show of hands? Ask them and make them tell us. How many would be willing to do things differently?
I think, in my own view, this could be a very clear theoretical. If this undertaking has been true, then we should have made tremendous strides. And I talk from the understanding that I've been a member of SWA for quite a number of years, trying to lobby for MDGs, trying to even coming to formulate quite a number of people I see here who worked around that. Gordon, I see my good friend here. So I think we need to be, if surely we are convinced with WASH issues, I think we must do things differently. And that, like for my country, we have managed to put those systems in place. I think those who work there, we have a sector-wide, inter-sector-wide forum for all of us where we plan. We have a country plan we have actually also, as a government, disengaged a bit and given some powers to some sector players as co-conveners to be able also to drive the process. But in terms of decision making, we make it as equal partners. But as it were, the government must be accountable and must be seen to be actually driving the process. And we have, I think all of us, if we are talking about accountability, governance issues, we can create systems that would be able to work for us. It is, yes, we can talk about corruption, but unless we become part of the systems that are going to change those things and governance issues, I think we are not committed to the aspirations of having the SDGs actualized. Even beyond 2030, if we cannot be able to change and actually put the resources together, I doubt whether we'll be able to make it. Way forward, I think all of us, if we can actually ride over our comparative advantages, the small amount of, if you call it a small NGO, a small private sector, government, if all this amount is put together, sum total becomes big. And yet, the selfish interest that we want to serve can still be served by way of you being put to be accountable to provide data as a reflection of what contribution in terms of implementation you are giving in that country. And I think that's the way forward. And we should be able to have a one hub where we actually send in all our information, we share, and that way we can actually be addressing a bit of governance issues.
Okay. So I hear a very clear message about the vision, that the role we would like to see government playing. I also hear a recognition that capacities need to be built to attain that, right, which is a segue, I think, onto Peggy.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Jamie, for inviting me to be on this panel. And I am representing the university sectors. I'm going to probably talk more about UNC since that's what I know the most. I was at Johns Hopkins for 12 years before coming here, so I have a perspective of those two kinds of places that do a lot of global work related to water, to maternal and child health, and so on. So the first point I'd really like to make is about the important role of great global and especially public universities in addressing problems, global problems in the world, including the MDGs and now the SDGs. Our campus is a contiguous campus, and that is so wonderful. At Hopkins, you had to take a bus to get to the anthropologists and the economists and so on. Here, we just walk across campus and we have a meeting and we say, let's work on this together. So it's very collaborative, very collegial, and I think that's incredibly important. And our campus also, I think, is very visionary. For 3 years, we had a theme, a cross-campus theme that was called Water in the World. And we're just beginning now launching a new 2-year campus theme, which is called Food for All. So I've sort of joked that now the next one has to be about sex, and then we'll have everything that anybody needs. But I think it speaks to our campus and our university as really being very forward-thinking and engaging across many, many disciplines, and that's the second point I'd like to make. I think we've learned that it's really important to be able to address these issues, and we're training the next generation. We are the ones who are coming to work for your organizations. Very important that they have broad interdisciplinary perspectives. So I've taught a class called Interdisciplinary Perspectives in Global Health for 10 years. This is the first fall I'm not teaching it. And it's based upon a framework that includes the roots of health, the social determinants of health, upon gender perspectives throughout, and we know how important that's going to be and continues to be. We also really try to integrate global and local. So that's in fact our tagline, which is global health is local health and global health is public health. And we do that because it's no longer possible to even think about working over there or working here. It's all interconnected, and that really speaks to what you're talking about. So let me just finish with the last point, which is I'm trained as a medical anthropologist, and I believe in communities and engagement and in collaboration and the incredible importance of that and having humility. And this is all about shared learning, mutual decision-making, and work together. So I know that we can do that. We have good models of doing that, but it's something we always have to check ourselves on, especially when we're coming from settings where we have the resources and we're bringing them to places where we're trying to do the work.
There's a learning theme coming out that several people
Yes.
are speaking to, having the humility to learn in everything we do and not assuming the right. Strong message, I think you're describing of the workers of the future, those who will deliver the dream that the SDGs represent, need to have that wider perspective and not work.
They do, and I would just say that, you know, in our student body, especially in the undergrad students, they really have stars in their eyes about this. They want to work internationally. They want to, quote unquote, solve problems and save the world. And so part of the learning and the teaching is to actually have them understand that that's not why we're doing this, and that it's not about we know and they don't know, but it's really about them. Sure.
So interdisciplinarity and intersectorality and the wider development perspective seems to be the perfect segue onto you, Paul, I think.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for inviting me. I'd make, reflecting on the MDGs, I'd make 3 points that absolutely build on points that others have made. I would say that most of the time we had the MDGs, or all of the time we had the MDGs, I was in USAID. So I have that, my perspective was from a donor perspective. I've been in RTI for the last 2 years. But the first kind of obvious point I'd make that I'm going to segue into what others have said is that I think we really learned that targets matter. You know, everyone knows that what gets measured is what gets done. You know that kind of in your individual office units. And I think the MDGs were extraordinarily valuable in getting international consensus on agreed priorities and moving forward. And we've seen that progress has been made on a number of them. So that's all great. I mean, what gets measured, what gets done. So, but I think the flip side of that is some of what's come out in these conversations. And there is a downside, I think, on sustainability. So if you are giving resources, a contract, a grant, whatever, to an organization, an international organization, NGO, and you say you need to get clean water to X number of people in Y number of years, and you're going to be measured by that, it focuses their mind, they achieve the results, but it forces them to be more in an attribution frame of mind as opposed to a contribution frame of mind. And it also impedes kind of working through local systems, and I think we've seen that in a lot of ways. So there are always pros and cons of doing things, and I think thinking more intelligently about that balance is something that we have to do as we move forward.
So can I pick you up on one thing? I know you've not finished, but that sounds like you're not a big fan of results-based aid.
Oh, no, I am. I just think we have to think very carefully about what we're measuring. Yeah, it's hugely important because you have to focus resources, because the other option is you have lots of organizations out there doing atomized programming that doesn't amount to anything. So it's a constant struggle to figure out what is it we really want to measure, what do we want to do, how do we organize people in a way where they're collaborating so that you get to scale, because otherwise we're not getting to scale. But so I think we've gotten to some scale, we haven't gotten to sustainability. Second unrelated point to that is macro trends are important and hard to predict, and someone made a comment about that. And it's everything. It's from the financial crisis to an earthquake in Haiti. I was in charge of USAID's Haiti reconstruction efforts after the earthquake. That arrests progress all the time, and those things happen all the time, and we don't really plan for them. And there's been a big global movement thinking more carefully about resilience and how you build resilience in, because all the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry, and we've got these great SDGs, but something bad is going to happen in a lot of countries over the next 10, 20 years on a regular basis. And how do we really think about how you continue to make progress, whether it's an economic crisis or a natural disaster or Ebola? And that really wasn't cooked into the menu. The third point I'd make, which Peggy and others are talking about, is about the critical importance of integration. The MDGs were really very stovepiped. I mean, the people who worked on them would argue no, but I think the SDGs are more, there's more of an attempt at integration. But we really did learn that integration is key, and I think two key examples around that. One is governance, which we've talked about a little bit. And you're going to ask questions about the future, so as a little bit of a preview, I think we've seen a global movement towards decentralization. Who delivers services in these countries? It's not the national government. In many cases, it was the national government or still is, but it's changing to local governments. And people in the health sector, the WASH sector, and many sectors don't have a lot of experience in thinking about how do you really strengthen issues of local governments. It's not just training and capacity building. It's in many ways, sustainability and governance is about how do you think about collecting taxes, revenue generation at the local level, and equitable allocation of taxes. A lot of people will talk about corruption, and corruption's an issue in Chicago, it's an issue everywhere. But it's really about efficient generation, allocation of resources. Another example, unrelated to governance, about integration that I know I've talked to Peggy about is nutrition. Was really not highlighted in the MDGs. How can you really improve maternal and child health without thinking about the role of nutrition? You can't, and I think we know that now from a lot of the related research. There's a big effort in the SDGs to connect not just nutrition and health, but to food security and agriculture, and thinking about those connections, or cognitive development and education. I think that's where we're going. And nutrition. I mean, it gets very, very complicated very quickly, and that's why you need a multidisciplinary approach and people with expertise across sectors. So those would be my three reflections.
So joining dots across, integration is coming across as a big theme, and then I want to use the word bookend, and that's probably not the way to describe the two people splitting at the ends of the group, but this idea that disasters, emergencies are frequent, they affect many countries. We've tended to separate the response from the long-term development, and that era is probably now over. It's not helping us anymore. I'd like to tell you, I know when I'm sitting in and listening to a panel like this one, I'm always sitting there thinking, oh, I've got a question I want to ask. When's my turn? So I'd like to turn around to the audience. We've heard some very interesting stuff here from our panel. All of these issues around governance, sustainability, and institutional roles will be critical. Does anyone want to make either a comment or put a question up to our group here? There's a mic if you want to use it, or
Peggy answers the hard question.
Thank you.
That's just an excuse to pass the really bad ones to you, Paul, so be careful.
Darren Saywell from Plan USA. Thanks for this first round of discussions, and particularly in relation to the role of institutions going forward. I think one of the things that we tend to forget about when we talk about the SDGs is the personnel and the capacity that we need to have in place. And you know, we always talk about that. We talk about we don't have capacity, but we don't unpack what that means. So for instance, we've got 15 years to get to 2030, but how long is it going to take us to bring on stream the capacity that we need in place to support those types of structures, those types of interventions that we need? We don't even have a very good handle on the quantum, the size of the capacity gap. We don't have a very good handle on the qualitative aspects of that capacity gap. Do we need more PhDs? Do we need more engineers? Do we need more masons? Do we need more community health workers? We don't know. And so what worries me about, you know, entering into this phase, and particularly thinking about institutions that are fit for purpose for 2030, is that we're going in blind on the biggest thing, which is capacity. So my question would be, how does this panel, which has respective inputs into capacity building across the spectrum, how are you thinking about that aspect, and how are we going to develop institutions that are fit for purpose for 2030?
Nice, challenging question. I don't see anyone else stepping up. Yes, I do see someone else stepping up to the microphone.
Well, thank you very much for the presentations. We're talking also about sustainable institutions. There is an interface between, in the institutional setup, where providers of services meet users. And there is an element to that, which is the payment for services. It's something that we think so obvious that maybe doesn't come into the discussion. But would you like to make a comment about that and what payment for services implies in terms of sustainable institutions?
I'm not going to suggest that we run those along the whole panel. That seems, but does anyone want to pick up either of those? So we've got a capacity question and a payment for services question.
I wanted to just say something about the capacity, because this is what I was being a little bit inarticulate about in my previous comment, but I don't know that it makes sense for us to be trying to quantify where we want to get to. If I think about USAID in 10, 20 years, I don't think we exist in anything like the current format. I think that we're nothing about direct service delivery. I think we're all about the upstream inputs, trying to catalyze, facilitate, work directly with governments to understand and think about how to leverage what they need to get done, but not at all trying to quantify or hit those results, but enable other people to enable governments, enable KEPA to reach those results through some really targeted interventions. So I think the capacity, if we spend a lot of time trying to quantify what capacity might be needed and then think about capacity building, we're going to get hung up. Whereas if we are sitting with him and he's developing his plan, and then we're identifying that sweet spot where we can make a difference, I think it's a lot more of a productive relationship. And then if USAID had a target around the organizational performance of those Kenyan institutions, we have a shared interest in success.
I think I want to follow it from there. If, for example, my understanding is that an NGO would have capacity to do something within a country. That's capacity within the country. So that capacity needs to come to the mainstream to be able to strengthen the lacking capacity within that country. But in trying to put systems and the work plan in a country, then whatever activities you are actually planning for gives you the capacity you require in that country anyway, because otherwise, and unless it's something which is planned well, then it means that you will not be able to actually tease out what capacity you want for X activity. But if we, all of us, plan together, and that's what I said, we can give, if plan, for example, is strong in issues of CLTS, why not? It can be a co-convener in that particular area as part of the capacity within the country. Because when it goes to rolling down the capacity to the counties, for example, then you become a key component in trying to build that capacity within those counties for that country. It becomes cheaper, it is available, we are not going to build it. But that doesn't mean that the governments are going to run away from also creating within that period, trying to bring in some capacity which can be trained from the already existing NGOs or CBOs.
I think everyone wanted to come in on this. This is a great discussion.
I would just say, when I was at Hopkins, we had a tremendous number of international students who came from all over the world. And many times their governments paid for them to be trained. And this is about capacity building across many different disciplines. That money's completely dried up. WHO had training programs. Ford Foundation had training. Rockefeller had training programs. That money's gone. So now where do we go? I don't think we should be bringing any more people to come for 5 years to UNC, except occasionally. And that means we're going to have more innovative ways of thinking about capacity building and training in places. And UNC has a really great poverty-funded program where we are placing faculty for 6 weeks or for a semester in a university. It's actually Wits University in South Africa. That's bringing people from all over Southern Africa for some training for capacity building. And I think that's an example of a new kind of a model. We have an NGO in the Triangle called IntraHealth International, and they're all about capacity building, especially related to health system strengthening. And that is done primarily in the countries where IntraHealth and USAID and so on are working. So I think we have to really be innovative to think about how we answer this question.
So, well, I mean, these are all sort of big thoughts in terms of where the sector's going and organizations. And honestly, I'm kind of focused on our immediate problem, because some of this conversation for me sort of assumes that our own organizations are going to be excellent at adapting and changing. And the fact of the matter is that that's not true, right? I mean, I know in my own organization, just talking about, I started, my first comment was about becoming a learning organization. And so now we've learned, we understand now a lot better than we did 4 years ago what's working and what isn't. And to make this matter, we have to be willing to change the way that we do things. And that means reskilling ourselves, training ourselves, getting out of some things, getting into others, figuring out who to partner with in an organization that's spread over 50 countries and 10,000 people. Just that task, so that we can be fit for purpose for what needs to be done now. Never mind what we're going to do in 2030. It's huge. So anyway, I don't have an answer to that. I'm just saying that I guess for me, a big dose of humility, just thinking about what the immediate challenge is going to be, just so that we can contribute in a meaningful way to the SDGs. And we all have to be thinking about how we get fit for purpose. And Kefa asked a great question. How many of us are willing to change? I hope it's everybody, but I know it won't be. And so anyway, we need to sort of think about that. Quick comment on the fee for service and so on. I mean, again, I'm not a water person and anything remotely like that, although I do come to this conference every year. I've learned a lot. And what I have learned, again, without sort of deep expertise, is that subsidies have been really problematic in terms of getting, long-term sustainability. So, yeah, we need to start thinking really hard. And the thing is, we know how to do it in other sectors. I don't know quite why we haven't done it here. I'm sure there are many smart people that know what to do, and it's all part of, I would imagine, a broader pot of things that we know that we need to do, and we haven't done it, and then we need to ask, why haven't we yet? And when will we?
So I'll take a radical approach and say we should stop focusing on traditional capacity building completely. Thinking about the developing country institutions, not our international organizations, for two reasons. One, if we wait until we've built capacity, we're going to be waiting 30, 40 years. People learn by doing. And also, what works, I don't know what we train people for, because what works in the Western Highlands of Guatemala does not work in Turkana in Kenya. And I think the big focus needs to be on how does the system work? So national governments are going to move towards a regulatory quality control role. And we need to help them think about what that looks like. And just do it. And the local governments are going to be delivering the services, and just structure the financial system so the money flows are going. They're going to make a lot of mistakes, but it is the learning by doing. It's the implementation science. It needs to be evaluated as you go along and figure out what works there. And a lot of the problem is the funders, the ultimate funder for USAID is the US Congress or the US people. They don't really have they don't allow for mistakes. So people don't like to hear that, well, that money didn't really work out. But at the end of the day, we're not going to get anywhere unless we start pumping money through local governments, let them deliver services, help national governments play that quality control. regulatory function. And then they're going to learn what works in their local environment, and it's going to be different than someplace else, and they're not going to come to UNC or Duke or any place and figure out what exactly learns in that local environment.
It's very
We'll
interesting.
learn from them.
You know, you've said two things that resonate very precisely, the discussions that I've been hearing here, that if we look medium, long term, we have national governments exercising regulatory approaches, creating organizational relationships that make sense in the national context, and local government playing a far larger role, but needing to have its capacities to play the role that it needs to play. Now, everyone's saying, I want to say something else, I want something, which is a great sign of a conversation, and I can't stop it, so we're going to carry on.
Okay, I want to provoke a reaction from some colleagues, especially UNICEF and WHO. Yesterday, I asked a question, what would be the role of a non-external catalyst? And in my mind, yesterday, what I had, what would be the role of WHO as a global technical arm in trying to also create the interest and within the countries in this area? I think that's the question I was asking, but I can see some of those colleagues are here, maybe.
Well, they're sitting here looking a bit uncomfortable.
And they'll leave it.
It's not usually for us to put the audience on the spot. That's very clever. I love it.
But Paul, you said you believed in a radical approach. Would you mind coming in on this issue a little bit? Well, someone from either WHO or UNICEF. These were the people on the spot a bit.
Yes.
So Kefa, just once more, what was the phrase you used that what was your question, the real question?
My question is, yes, we want to do things differently. Issues of capacity are being raised. Mm-hmm. I totally agree with what we are agreeing. Countries are going to actually build capacity within their area. Of course, that makes a lot of sense because it is homegrown. But I believe that for harmonized approach in all countries, colleagues from WHO cannot escape having a role in this.
Well, I'm sure they're going to be very pleased to know that national governments think they've got a future role. I mean, Bruce, this is a gift for you.
I mean, when I listen to these discussions, I mean, Rick and I are sitting, and Maurizio, we're sitting with smiles on our face because this is what we do. We don't actually, we're not the World Bank. We're not delivering, services directly. We're not injecting cash into governments. We are limited to technical assistance. And so when I listen to this, I think this is really, I mean, in many ways, it's interesting the discussion's going this way, but this is all we've been sort of constrained to do anyway, right? And so, I mean, we do need to do more of that. And I think that the thing that struck me most, in looking at Kefa and the others as well, is this sort of Heather's comments about what have we learned, and it's like this whole one plan, sector-wide approach. I mean, we all have a place in that. We got to fit into that particular plan, and for me, like one of the issues that I think with all our institutions is predictability of funding. I would love to deliver, quality technical assistance to many countries, but funding is here and there, and how do we do that? And I think what we need to do is we need to be able to, all of us, get around that national system. So if funding dries up from one source, the nationally agreed system is still functioning well. But absolutely, and I also like this idea that Kefa was saying capacity is everyone, and we've seen that in some of our technical discussions where everyone is sort of learning from everyone, and that's the best type. We had this other meeting where we were talking about advocacy, and advocacy means, advocacy is absolutely just everyone coming together, making. Anyway, thank you.
This is great because I can't stop people wanting to.
I just want to jump in on one thing because I don't know how many people saw that presentation about the hand washing in schools from just visual clues. Did anyone see that from the University of Oklahoma? So that is really stuck in my head because a lot of us are talking about capacity, we're talking about knowledge, information, it's got to be more immediate. It's got to be more visual. It's got to be, I don't know. It's got to be different, the way we're sharing and trading information. And I just, I saw that presentation where there's no interaction with children. They're just following visual clues. And I'm thinking IKEA. I'm thinking, the private sector knows how to do this. Mm-hmm. They know how to convey information in these really concise packages that are really tailored to the market. And then I was thinking about the NGOs, CSOs, CBOs. We need to decentralize the information. It can't go through all these things. We have the technology now. We need, it sounds, I think, maybe frivolous, but I don't think it's at all frivolous.
Paul, you wanted to come in on this as well?
Well, I don't know if you were going to ask us about the agenda for the future, but Heather's comments reminded me, should I hold off?
I'm going to try to, because I know we push right up the clock.
Yeah.
But I think I'd like to let each person on the panel make one more round of comments, and I'm going to ask people to be as precise as they can. But there are two things, not everyone has to cover everything. There are two things in my mind that I would love to hear. One is thinking in terms of your institution type. What do you see as the very top agenda item as we move into the SDG period? So what is the real thing we need to hit up now? And some of you have touched on that to some extent. But the other thing is a little bit more adventurous. So, think forward to 2030. I was going to say you're now the CEO of an institution of your type, but at least in Tessie's type, she's already arrived,
Yeah.
So that doesn't work. So you're now an eminent, distinguished advisor to your successor.
Yeah.
I would never say that. That was not me. But you're in August, but what would you hope that institution would be setting itself up to do in 30 years' time? If we've not necessarily delivered fully, but we've moved on this great SDG vision, which is really quite something. It's quite transformational. Tessie, forgive me for picking you out as an example, but do the big international NGOs, have they done their day? That's it, and this is the perfect case where you can say we've worked ourselves out of a job, or will they have a role?
Go really quickly.
Aid. Could perhaps everyone say something on those two things? And then I think these poor guys have been working all day. We've got to take pity on them. Yeah. I don't know who wants to start. Paul, you're
yeah, I'll be quick.
Itchy.
So, because we've talked about a lot of it. For me, the future agenda is first is about integration across sectors, and I won't say more because we've talked about it. Its second point I've talked about is the governance issue. Mm-hmm. But two new pieces that we haven't talked about are the role of the private sector, which is, I'm surprised it didn't come up yet. It was on my mind, and I forgot. So what is the role of the private sector? How sorry. I mean, how do we think about that? A lot of services across different sectors are being delivered. Private sector stepping in where government fails. How do you integrate them? And technology. Technology is not a panacea, but we've seen how IT technology has helped make big advances. Big data analytics, I think, is going to be ever more important. So that is key for us in RTI. We have a new partnership with IBM to think about data revolution for development. How do we use big data analytics to drive better development outcomes? In terms of 30 years from the future, the thing about my institution, I lead the international development portfolio, but RTI has 2/3 of its work in the domestic US. So in the most advanced economy in the world, we do a lot of analytical research around how to improve social programs. The issues don't go away. These countries are not going to achieve nirvana and everyone goes out of business. Maybe aid will go out of business because there's not a development issue, but we do work for state governments and national government, for the private sector and foundations. And in the future, as countries improve their income, I think the institutions that are adding value will continue to do work for other funders. We'll work directly with those governments if we can add value and help them think about how to make adjustments to programs to have better impact.
And fundamentally, the SDGs are for everyone. They're not like SDGs for the directed aid for certain countries. So RTI's future is safe. We look forward to seeing you as CEO in a few years. Should we go the other way along the line? Peggy, do you want to, having had the private sector stolen from you?
Yeah. So it's okay. So I would just say at UNC, we actually have an entrepreneur in residence, Don Holsworth, who is funded Jamie's professorship and has been at the conference. And he helped me with this piece, and he said, if business is not asked to be part of the solution, they're more likely to be part of the problem. So I think the need for public-private partnerships is really very important. I think we need to really scale up what we know what works. And we, in my own field, maternal and child nutrition and health, we really know what works. The Lancet documents in 2008 and then 2013, there are 10 interventions we know work based on evidence. And it's low-hanging fruit, and we need to scale. And so that brings me to the last thing, which is how do we scale? And how do we do the science of delivery? And how do we train people from the university perspective in implementation science? It's a big hot button thing now, but there's actually a very systematic way of doing this work, and we've got to learn how to do that. And that really starts, I think, in the classroom as well as in the field. And I see that that's going to be the future, and we can have great successes if we do that.
From this side, I think from government, continuous strengthening of systems will be the inner thing. Of course, enhancing collaboration and strengthening partnership will be very critical. But most important, I think the issues of social marketing for sanitation will be extremely valuable in trying to create a business engagement with private sector to be able to produce low cost, reduce the cost of the equipment so that it will be accessible easily. Now, because that will again give the private sector some motivation that there is business. As they do business, they will be reducing the cost and they will be increasing access to the facilities. And I think that way, if countries are going to provide enabling environment for that and actually going to reduce even taxation for private sector, that will encourage. And that will mean that accessing some of the sanitation applications will be cheaper and will be available.
So Kevin, let me ask, does that mean for you getting the regulatory structure in Ghana refined and in place? Sorry, in Kenya. That was terrible, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Forgive me for that. In Kenya.
Yes.
Is that a top priority for you? Stepping forward, is that the top of the to-do list?
Actually, indeed, in Kenya now, we have taken an ambitious step with the World Bank. And I think some colleagues were here. Anybody here? Yeah. So we realized that traditionally some of the applications were even heavier and more costly. And with what we are now doing, we are reducing the cost. And private sector, as much as they were actually stepping behind and saying, maybe there's nothing, and now we are trying to tell them there's business in sanitation. So they will get motivated because they will be manufacturing, and the ministry, because of trying to reduce disease burden, robbing the government to reduce the taxation. I think that's one way we think, and of course the communication element also going to the people is part of the change of behavior. So I think it is actually, we are achieving two things at the same time.
I mean, I'm not naive, but I mean, I can see the development agencies having a role as a facilitator, the broker, the convener, maybe the sort of strategic development inputs. I mean, if we're serious about systems thinking, we need to actually do some serious systems analysis in countries. We need to actually do systems mapping. We need to actually make that part of our development toolbox in a very systematic way. I can see that aid potentially could play a role around that. DFID certainly could play a role around the governance work. You know, there are some comparative advantages of the different donors in different areas. I do feel like this we'll do everything in every country is just not going to survive. And I don't think it should. And then I think if we are able to provide that upstream strategic input according to sound development science, knowing what works and what doesn't work, and working in a closer partnership, it would be easier for us to collectively identify those inputs that are really going to make a difference. And then if we channel the money through the local systems, use local procurement systems, use local budgeting and accounting systems, start doing some direct contracting, government to government contracting, it could make a difference.
Okay, so I'm the last person. So what can I say that hasn't been said before? Well, in the case of plan, to go back to where we might be, I mean, clearly, it's no longer going to be about boots on the ground, right? That's not what we're about. In fact, that's increasingly not what we're about now. But in the future, we're not going to be a service provider. It doesn't make any sense. We need to sort of get out of the way, strengthen capacity systems, all the stuff that we've talked about here. Our role has to be around voice, and it has to be around accountability. It has to be about dissemination of information. It has to be about investment in research. That's what our role needs to be. It's no longer necessarily about providing direct services. I also would like to believe, as we look ahead into the future, that there's a different narrative in development among donors and among organizations like ours. The narrative has I guess served us well for a little bit, but it's not serving us well anymore. And it goes back to something that Paul and others have mentioned. We're not comfortable with the idea of failure, but I think obviously we recognize that we're in very risky business. We're in a very risky business where more often than not, what we do fails rather than succeeds. We never talk about what doesn't work. All we want to talk is about all the things that worked. And we've got to make our donors more sophisticated. And here I'm not talking about necessarily big institutional donors, but remember, I've got 100,000 retail donors, and my conversation with them is, there's a lot of misery in this world. Give me money, I'm going to make a difference. And that's just a bad conversation because first of all, it doesn't talk about all the good things that are happening, and we've been peddling misery for too long, so I'd like to believe by 2030 we've got a whole different narrative going on. And because we've been peddling misery for so long, I believe that's one of the reasons why the American public here doesn't give as much to international development, because it's like, why? I give money and, I've got another mess in my hands in like a few. So, we've got to change the narrative. We've got to change the narrative about what's working. We've got to change the narrative about what's not working. And maybe when we do change the narrative, we can dare to take more risk, and we can dare to do things differently, because that's what's going to enable us to succeed by 2030.
It's a great thing. Everyone on the panel has sort of sent, someone else said my thing before me, so I'm going to say it because Tessie, I was sitting thinking, what have we not touched that I need to make sure we mention? And what did I have? Risk-taking linked to learning and accountability, the two things you've just flagged. So thank you for making my life easier. I think we've heard a lot of common themes. So the themes that are coming across from the different institutional perspectives have a lot of commonality. I'm not going to try and recite the whole list, but what's very interesting is each theme fits differently in terms of the institutional roles that we're hearing. So we've got a common list of issues, but a clear differentiation of the roles that have to be played. And I'm going to say this gentleman in the middle seems to be the key player, because we all keep coming back to system strengthening, government, central government, local government. So I'd like to ask everyone in the room to join me in thanking our panel. And I'd like to ask our panel to thank you for being the most patient
seriously.
audience. 4 days into a conference. You're marvelous. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
I have to show you something.
Very nice to have